Good evening. My name is Gil Stein, and I'd like to welcome you all to the Oriental Institute this evening. It's a pleasure and an honor to see so many people here. Before I begin, I just wanted to quickly let everyone know that our schedule for this evening is that Professor Gibson will give his talk, and then shortly afterwards, we're very honored that Donny George's sister, Anita, and her husband, Peter, are here with us this evening. And after Professor Gibson's talk, Peter Bobo will be speaking as well. And then after his remarks, we will adjourn to our Mesopotamian gallery, where we will dedicate one of the display cases in our Mesopotamian gallery in Donny's memory and in his honor, and there'll be a reception afterwards. So I really hope you'll be able to join us for all of that. We had originally, about a year ago, planned on having this evening be a guest lecture, a members lecture by Donny George Johanna, and we had very much wanted to have him come and talk to us about his archaeological research on the Samaran culture of central Mesopotamia, and we were very much looking forward to his being our return guest here. We've had a very long and happy association with Donny George Johanna as a great scholar of Mesopotamian archaeology. And as we all know, unfortunately, that just wasn't meant to be. And he passed away this spring. And we thought that the most appropriate way to honor his memory would be to turn the guest lecture into a memorial for Donny, because this is the perfect place for it. It's a place where the two parts of Donny George's life come together: his life as a scholar and his life as a devoted father and husband and member of the Assyrian community, where those two parts of his life come together. And I'm really happy that I can see in our audience people who knew him in these two complementary halves of his life. So I think a memorial is a really valuable time, because it gives a chance, after a little bit of time has passed, after the initial shock of the death of someone who is a loved and respected friend. After that initial shock has passed, it's a chance for us to get together and remember this person in the goodness of their life. And that's what I hope we can do this evening, is to really evoke that. And it's a chance for those of us who knew Donny as an archaeologist to learn about the other half of his life, and similarly those of you who are his friends and loved ones from the Assyrian community to learn about him as an archaeologist, because those are really the two things that last from a person: what they were like as a person, but the legacy they left as a person, and the legacy that they leave as a scholar, which is something that will also last for a very, very long time. And I hope that we can do that this evening. I'm very grateful to my colleague, Professor McGuire Gibson, for agreeing to speak with us this evening. Professor Gibson has known Donny for close to 30 years, roughly 30 years, right? Yani, takriban. And of course, Professor Gibson has worked in Iraq for many, many years, since 1964, and he is a true expert on Mesopotamian culture, and someone deeply devoted to the people and culture of Iraq. So I'd like to introduce my colleague who will be speaking with us on the subject, Donny George, Johanna, One Scholar's Contribution to Mesopotamian Archaeology. So please join me in welcoming Professor McGuire-Gibbs.
This is a very typical set of pictures of Donny, and Donny completely even enclosed within Mesopotamian antiquities here at the Oriental Institute in 2006. Donny George, as a younger man, played in a rock band. Here he is on drums. And my first year in Iraq, 1964, I was there about a month and a half earlier than the rest of the archaeological team that was going to be digging at Nippur. And so in those days, there was a YMCA, and it was just about the nicest place to stay in Iraq for a long time. So I stayed at the YMCA for about a month and a half. And fairly often in the afternoons, I would hear this rock music, very, very, sort of Tom Jonesy sorts of things and various things. And I suspect it was Donny's group. Now, this is called Los Bravos, and he apparently went into another band which was called the 99%, which I think Peter is going to talk about. But he had many, many aspects, and this was one of them. Donny he got his BA from the University of Baghdad in 1974, and he became a member of the Antiquities Department in 1976. And it's in that period that I met him in an office with Behnam Abu Suf. And it was quite clear that this was an exceptional guy. His English was perfect. His father had worked for years for the British Council, and he had grown up speaking English. And he was extraordinarily bright, extraordinarily effective, and that proved to be his characteristic for the rest of his life. In the things have gone, okay. All through the 1970s into the 80s, he proved to be the guy at the Antiquities Department who could get things done. If you needed something done, you went to Donny. He knew all about photography. He knew all about electronics. He could make computers work. He was one of the earliest people working on computers in Iraq. And so he became more and more an indispensable person. He also worked on archaeological sites, several of them. One of the things that he did is in the 80s, he was in charge for a year or two of the reconstructions that were going on at the site of Babylon, which is a major, major construction job. And it shows the kind of trust that they had in him, that he was put in charge of this multi-million-dollar operation for those years. In 1990-91, it became, 1990 already, it became clear there was going to be a war with Iraq. One of the things that the Iraqis did was to decide to put the most valuable things from the Iraq Museum into the vaults of the central bank about 50 feet below ground. And that's the central bank you're looking at there with the plane flying over it. That building and that building are all part of the central bank. And it was Donny who was entrusted with moving that stuff out of the museum and into the central bank. And all through the 1990s, that material stayed in crates in the bank. They didn't take it out because they didn't know when next time that Iraq was going to be in war. So they kept it in the safe for all the way through the 90s. And, word went out, it was in the newspapers a lot, that the treasures of Iraq had been stolen, that Saddam's wife and girlfriend were wearing the jewelry that you see here, and it had all been gone. But I was going into Iraq all the time through the 70s, through the 90s, and was seeing Donny every time, and I would say, I knew this stuff was in the bank, and I said, the stuff is still in the bank. He said, yes, I go there and check on it every year, and I can't take the boxes out. If we take them out, they tell them we can't put them back in. So we check to see that everything is intact, and it's all there. So all the stories that were in the newspaper, we knew were nonsense, that in fact, everything was safe in the bank. In 1991, just before the bombs started falling in Kuwait, the Antiquities people told UNESCO that they were going to go to Kuwait and get the antiquities out of the Kuwait Museum and bring them to Baghdad for safekeeping. And they wrote the letter to UNESCO, they told them what they were going to do. Donny was the person who was in charge of taking the trucks down, getting the material, packing it up, bringing it to Baghdad. And it stayed in the museum in Baghdad throughout the crisis, throughout the war, and it was returned unopened. It was unopened all the time. It was in Baghdad. People came up with a UN group, and they got the material out, and they counted out the objects, and it was about 44,000 objects. The people who were representing Kuwait had brought up a list of 1,900 objects, and they returned 44,000. The Kuwaitis say that there were 3 emeralds that were stolen, but that's a pretty low cost for getting back 44,000 objects, and that only 3 things went missing, and all that is amazing. Okay, Donny, in the 90s, now, if there was one guy who was a candidate for being sent out for an absolutely first-class degree anywhere in America or Europe, it was Donny George. He was absolutely brilliant, and there was no question this guy should have gone out to get a PhD. And in those days, in the 1980s, 1990s, when he was ready to do this, there was just no government money to do it, and he wasn't able to do it. But he was one of the first to get a degree, a PhD degree, from Baghdad University. And he did it on the site of Tel Aswan. Tel Aswan is a marvelous site dating to something like 5,300, 5,500 BC. It's up on the Tigris River north of Baghdad by about 90 kilometers, and it's a walled town. Oops, it's a walled town with a moat around it. They actually bring the water in from the Tigris and surround the site with a moat. And it has these very, very elaborate houses, and it has burials under those houses, which are full of these little statues, hundreds of these little statues of alabaster. And these things look like, when you see them, these photographs don't quite do them justice. When you look at them, they look like marzipan. And you really feel as if you could eat them. They're the most beautiful little things. There are also these really remarkable vessels of all sorts in the same sort of marzipan-y stone. Absolutely gorgeous and very, very unusual shapes and sizes. This is the so-called Samara culture that Gil talked about earlier. Anyway, Donny did this. He completely restudied all the work that had been done previously by other archaeologists working for about 15 years on this site. And he went in the 1990s, did some new investigations, and then wrote up his PhD and summed up what was going on, what we know about that site and objects like this. And he was able to get that published in English a few years ago, and so that is available for people. Now, in the 91 war, the invasion of Iraq didn't go in very far. It went past Ur, and it went in a little way and then stopped and receded. And in that experience of that war, it became clear that in warfare, Iraq had a lot to lose. This is the site of Ur. People know it as Ur of the Chaldees. This is the site of Ur, and in here, this is the ziggurat, and in here, you see those square holes. Those are okay. Those are ancient. But there are dozens of little holes like that, and like that, and like that, and like that, and that. Those are all brand new holes from one strafing run by one plane. And there are 4 bomb craters here, huge bomb craters. This is one of 4 bomb craters in the temple area out in the front and to the side of the ziggurat. So these sites get damaged. And also there's other damage. There's another site nearby called Tel El-Laham, where the American soldiers dug in with bulldozers, and these are something to do with rockets. And the archaeological sites could be damaged. This is some of the holes that the strafing run, the bullets from the plane hitting the ziggurat. Over here, the other thing that happened just after the war, there was an uprising in the north and the south of Iraq, and 9 out of the 13 regional museums in the country, there were museums in just about every province of Iraq. These museums were attacked by mobs, robbed, and some of them were burned, as you see in the picture on the right. And about 5,000 objects were lost at that time. And Donny was the person in the museum in '91 who was really the key person trying to get all the information of what was lost onto a computer program. And right after the war in 91, I went there along with Lemia Gailani and Selma Radi, and we showed up at the museum and we did what we could to try to help them to do this. But at that time, Selma sat down at the computer and would start to enter this information in, and it would crash every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, because it was full of viruses. And so, you'd have to type in a line and save it, type in a line and save it, type in a line and save it, otherwise you'd lose it. But they laboriously put together a list of these 5,000 objects, so we published a publication to try to get the objects back, to let people know they'd been stolen. And so far, about 4 out of the 5,000 objects have been recovered. So those are gone. Now, that looting of that museum, of those museums, that looting, brought about a tremendous occurrence of looting across the country in archaeological sites. The sorts of things that collectors want around the world are tablets, cuneiform tablets, cylinder seals, and statues, as well as anything else they can get. What the looters really love to find is this stuff, because even if they can't sell it, they can sell it to jewelers and boil it down, various things. So that the material that came out of the museums, a lot of it went on the market, went into private collections. Someday some of it may come to the light. But what really happened is, having found out there was a market for this stuff, they began to dig in the archaeological sites, and they made it into moonscapes, in site after site after site, especially in the south, in the Sumerian areas. This is the site of Umma, which is completely chewed up. Some of these holes are actually older than that. This is a site that was dug on as early as the 1860s, 1870s, but the Iraqi government had stopped all this in the 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s. There was virtually no illicit digging going on at all in the country until the 91 war. And after that, it has become a field day. And it's going on at an industrial scale. Hundreds of guys working sometimes with generators and underground in tunnels, digging, squirreling away at random, just digging the sites up. Now, being aware of all of this sort of thing, have we lost the slide? No. I don't know where that came. These are a little bit out of place. Okay, the museum itself. The museum is not just a museum. This part of the museum, all of this is the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. These are the administrative offices, and this is where all the records are kept of all the archaeological work that goes on in the country. There's a library and a theater over in this part, but it's this whole triangle like this. And in 2003, these were hit. In 1991, these ministries were bombed. This ministry was bombed. That's a telecommunications center. That was bombed, and the debris actually came over and broke the windows of the museum. This was a ministry. That's the foreign ministry. There's a bus station and railroad station, and it's in a neighborhood full of targets. And in 2003, every one of these was hit again. So that there is great danger to this museum in case of war. And they, after 91, became very aware of that. There's a museum complex again, with the museum halls here, the administrative offices. There's the library and the auditorium. Now, the archaeological sites, all through the south, especially down through here in the Sumerian area, these were being eaten up by looters already in the 1990s, right after the war. And the government in Baghdad was so weak it really couldn't control most of the country. It could control the main roads in the daytime, it controlled the major cities, but what went out on the countryside, they had no control over. So dozens of these sites were already being looted. The looting after 2003 resumed on a much, much bigger scale in much of this area. Now, there is a site here called al Gharib. In the 1990s, and because there was so much stuff flowing illegally out of Iraq, finally when they got some money in 1998, 1999, the Department of Antiquities sent crews down to the south to dig in these places, including al-Gharib, which is where Donny was digging, and there's a place called up here, which was being dug, and 5 or 6 other places up in here. This had been the scene of major looting, all of this in here. And so they concentrated on the areas where the looting was worse. But of course, they were digging here and they stopped looting here, but the looters would move to another site and to another site and to another site. And many of the looters, of course, went to work for the archaeologists. and became diggers, and then whenever the archaeologists were around, they would go ahead and dig anyway. This is a site called al Gharib. It's still not identified as with its ancient name. This is a site that Donny was in charge of. In the background over here, you will see a very big building. This is an administrative building or a palace. We're standing up on what is a big platform. There would have been a temple on top of this, and at the bottom is a very interesting temple like this. And here you're looking at the you're looking at this platform that we're standing on up in here, and this temple. And that's Donny in his dig clothes, and that's me in 2001. Here's the digging as it's going on. There's the palace in the background, and here they're just beginning to get this plan of this temple. There's the plan of the temple there. There's an isometric to give you an idea what it would be like to go in it. This has extraordinarily deep foundations. They go down about 5 meters. It's an incredible building, very unusual, and an extraordinary find, all made of unbaked brick. This was a site that Donny was working on the book of this, and unfortunately he never finished it. He did a couple of articles. Now, having seen that the war was coming after 2002, Donny was, at that time, had already risen to be the director of research in the museum. He wasn't the head of the museum or of the antiquity service, but he was the head of research. He was pressing that they should do something to try to protect the museum in case of war. And so what he came up with the idea of letting the museum protect itself. And what you do is you brick up vulnerable points like this one. There was a doorway leading to the outside. You brick it up so on the outside it doesn't look like there's a doorway at all. In certain places he would run a door right straight across run a wall across a hallway so that you couldn't see that the hallway went on. As the troops got closer, what they did is brought in welders, and they welded shut many of these metal doors and the things leading back to the major storerooms. And they moved. We knew that what they had done in 1991, which is to move the antiquities, as much as they could move out of the halls, they moved. The big stuff they couldn't move, they left in place, but they took all the smaller stuff and they put it either in storerooms or the most valuable stuff, they put it in the central bank. We were assuming, us sitting here in America, sitting in Europe, we were assuming they would do the same thing. And in fact, I kept sending reporters to see Donny George because Donny George would talk to reporters. And Donny's English was great. He got along. He presents extraordinarily well. And so we would see, every once in a while, we would see a report in The Guardian or in the Independent or some other newspaper or the BBC about how the museum was preparing to meet the invasion. And Donny, at that time, like all the other officials in the museum, was wearing military uniforms. They'd been wearing military uniforms through the Iran-Iraq War and through much of the 90s, and they were still wearing, everybody was on a war footing. And so Donny talked to these people, and he said, we will, of course, we will put these into safekeeping. So we knew that the deal was on. They were going to put the stuff away. So it was not surprising to find that they had put most stuff away. They didn't get it all done. They didn't have much time to do it at the end. So some stuff was kept on display that would have come off, and unfortunately, some of that stuff met a bad fate. Now, Donny also dug a couple of these pits in the front of the museum garden. And he says that they were so, in case the museum was bombed, a shell hit, that they could run out and get into this thing and they might survive. The military, when they came here after the war, were insisting that these were firing points and that they were for fighting. And maybe maybe certain officials thought they were for fighting. Donny didn't think they were. You'll notice that any of the places they would fire at would be either run straight into a wall or would run into the wall over here. They're not terribly well-designed firing points, but they would keep you maybe from getting hurt if you were in it. They were never used, but they were preparing for that. Everything was on a war footing. But when the war happened, when Baghdad was taken, for 24 hours, nothing happened. No looting was taking place for 24 hours. And then Baghdad fell on the 9th. On the 10th of April, looters got into the museum from a back door and breaking through a back window And later, looters came right in through the front door because they weren't being stopped. There were American troops sitting at the intersection right down from the museum. One of the people at the museum went to them and said, please, please come and protect the museum. There was nobody in the museum at that time except this guy who's like a caretaker and his son, Donny, and the director of antiquities, and one guard and 2 other people were still in the museum on the 9th, the day that the fighting came to the museum. We were sitting here in America and in England and Europe, and we were hearing them say that the troops were getting to such and such a place, and they announced on the 9th that the troops had gotten to the Ministry of Information. Well, the Ministry of Information is only about 2 blocks away from the museum, so I was expecting to see on the television a general standing in front of the museum saying, we have secured the museum for Iraq, and it never came. And so I began to send off emails and telephone calls to people in the Pentagon, and I also sent off emails to reporters who were sitting in Baghdad in the Palestine Hotel. Guys from the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and saying, get over to the museum and find out whether it's been looted. Well, they got there on the 12th, along with the TV cameras, and it had been looted. And Donny and the rest of them, who were going to stay in the museum, had left on the 9th because it looked as if they were going to be fighting actually in the museum itself. And so the director of antiquities says, we'll leave. They got in their car, they took off their uniforms, they dropped them, they went out, got in their cars, and left, went across the river. They were not able to get back across the river because they were being guarded and held by the U.S. troops until the April 13th. On April 12th, this is what it looked like. This is what the reporters got to see. This very, very famous picture of this is the guy who actually lived on the complex. This was the caretaker, and he's sitting there with his head in his hands. The looters have left. They've run away from the reporters, and they've left the mess behind them. And what you see here, there's Donny, by the way, looking at the wreckage in the Assyrian Hall. You'll notice, by the way, in the background, there are these funny things. Those are sandbags that they had put down in front of these things. So in case they fell, they would be protected somewhat. They didn't have enough time to actually do very much to try to hold them in place and protect them. They did what they could. But this is an object has been taken. About 40 major items were taken from the museum halls themselves. And here you're looking at the museum halls. This is what the reporters first started saying. And people started saying, oh, everything's gone, everything's been stolen, huge amounts have been stolen. Well, you can look in and see that not everything is stolen. There are things still on display here, and there are a few things still on display, but there are empty cases. Well, those of us who knew what the routine was knew that these would have been emptied by the museum staff itself before the war. So we weren't bothered by the empty cases. People came in and smashed things, but they didn't steal the objects out of these cases. The unfortunate thing is that they also got into, well, this is some of the stuff that it was on display. Here you see a case with the front glass broken out, and you see a round circle. Maybe you can see it. That was from this piece. This weighs about 400 pounds. And this is probably what they dragged down this marble staircase. It was up on that floor. They dragged something very heavy down here, and it was just inside a door there. It's probably this piece. They dragged it down, bumping it down the stairs, and they took it, and they held it for about 2.5 weeks. But in the meantime, we and the British and the French had already made this stuff so public. We'd put it out on websites, and we'd put out as many pictures of what we knew was on display in the museum as we could. We made the stuff too hot to handle for any of the dealers, and the dealers just wouldn't take delivery. And so a lot of the stuff they finally did return. A U.S. team went out and was able to buy some of it back and was able to seize some of it. And this piece was actually recovered about 2 weeks later with some damage, but they did get it back. But this is what it looked like in the storeroom. They had broken through. This is one of Donny's doors that he had built a wall in front of. Well, they just cracked right through the wall and came on down into the major storeroom. And the storerooms in the basement level and on the first floor level, they look like that. Actually, this is after about a month. This was taken when we got there about a month later. And they had already started to clean it up, so it wasn't in such bad shape as it had been. It had been just total chaos. And Donny is right there in the middle of trying to deal with this. This is what you lose in the museum halls, what you lose of objects, is probably not as great a loss as what you see here. Because the looters came in and they just wreaked havoc in all the offices. 120 offices, they broke through the doors of all the offices, got in, and they just threw the paper on the floor. In some cases, they tried to burn them. And, you know, this is the guy holding up a rug, a very, very old rug. It's been torn to shreds. But the records of the institution are down here. You have lost the institutional memory. And hundreds of pieces of paper that have just been thrown all over the place and gone. And in some places, they crack safes like that. They sort of peel them open like that with the can opener to get the, that was the payroll for the next 2 weeks for the people in the antiquity service. Now, finally, on April 16th, the Amish did show up and did, after a lot of working, they did finally come and protect the museum. And there's the tank protecting the museum. And this is the only real visible scene of any fighting that took place. A tank stood off and fired a round through here because there was some guys up here with a rocket-propelled grenade, and they were going to shoot at the tank. And they apparently got in because if you went inside here, you looked at the stairway, there was blood coming down the stairway. So they did get the guy. And you will read in Bogdanos' book that there was a big battle that took place. The Republican Guard was in this museum complex, and they were all over the place, and they were fighting in this front yard. And in fact, we'll get to that, whether that's really true. Now, in this first month, probably by about May, when this picture was taken, the U.S. forces began to bring in people to run the ministries. And the person who was to run the Ministry of Culture, under which the Antiquities came at that time, was this guy, Pietro Cardoni, a very, very wonderful Italian diplomat who was very close to retirement, or had come out of retirement to do this. And Donny is greeting him, and you can see, everyone just gravitates to Donny. This is the head of the Antiquity Service back here. This is Dr. Jabbar Halil. He held the job for another 3 or 4 months and then was replaced by someone else. And then finally, Donny was given the job about 2 years later. Okay, one of the major figures in this post-destruction of the museum was this man here, Matthew Bogdanos, who was an army officer, but he is also a prosecutor in New York. And he led a team to come in to find out what had gone on in the museum and how it had gotten robbed, and he wrote a report on this. Well, he and Donny worked very, very closely together throughout that. There was a group that came in 1 month after the war, including myself and Henry Wright. There was a group from the National Geographic. I was also serving on a UNESCO fact-finding group, and believe me, UNESCO is not as powerful as National Geographic. Any place we went, if we held up our National Geographic cards and said we're with National Geographic, the U.S. Army immediately knew who we were down to the lowest soldier. UNESCO didn't mean a thing to most of these guys. Okay, now, one of Bogdanos' major points is that there was a battle in the museum grounds. And the reason there has to be a battle in the museum grounds is there's, in these Geneva Convention and the Hague Convention, if you are having a real battle and you cannot prevent an archaeological or cultural site from being damaged, it's excusable. And you see, the destruction of the museum was done not by the U.S. Army, but was done out of negligence because they didn't protect it. So in order to be able to say, well, it was a battle situation, there's a big claim that there was Republican Guard in here and that there was a big battle. But there's not, I found one bullet, I walked around the entire museum, one bullet hole in the face of this museum, and there are a couple of broken windows, but that's probably from just blast, but there are almost no broken windows through the entire building. So, no big battle took place in the museum grounds. And the uniforms that were found in the back, and a couple of guns that were found in the back, in the guards, there were 40 guards in this museum, and they all ran before the war. They just threw their uniforms off and threw them on the ground and went off in their cities. And these were the uniforms that were found. So, there was no real fighting in the museum itself. There's also a claim that there had been a sniper up in that window shooting at American troops. And this is a round that came from a tank that came through the wall and buried itself in the opposite wall. And this is Bogdanos pointing to it. And this is supposed to be the window where the person did his shooting. Well, if you look out at that window, you see a wall, you see some trees, and you see see that little teeny bit of light? That's this. That's it. It's the smallest target imaginable. It's a very, very dumb sniper. Or there was no sniper. Anyway. With the U.S. Army in control under Bogdanos, they did in fact begin, because the group he had was people in the army, but they were also they were FBI people. They were in reserve, and they were FBI people. They were policemen from New York, policemen from various other places, and they did a real investigation. And they tracked down a lot of some of the objects that had been some of the most important objects, including the very, very famous mask from Warka or from Uruk. And this is the return of that, and this is the head of the Antiquities Service taking the receipt of that. There was another extraordinarily important object. And this is all it was. There was the tiny bit of the base of it left here, and it had been pulled off its plaster mounting, and it had been taken away. And that's this piece here, very, very famous and important artistic piece. It was returned finally in the back of a car. They had given an amnesty to anyone who returned it. This is one of these policemen who helped to return this stuff. And it came back in 13 pieces. It's all there. And there's a tiny bit of damage, but not much. They were very lucky to get it all back. It had been broken and put together initially. It had been in pieces already. You can see the cracks running through it. So not that much damage was done, but they were very lucky to get it back. Now, there's also the question of what happened to all the stuff in the central bank. Well, that had been put down there in 91. They knew it was there in 2003. It was still there. The unfortunate thing was the bank had been hit by bombs, and also looters tried to go down and get into the vaults. And one of them tried to open up the vault with an RPG, one of these propelled grenades. And in doing it, he killed himself. The blast killed him. They found the body actually down in the bottom, but it did damage to the door, and it also apparently triggered this reaction where the whole place just filled with water. So there were 50 feet of water. National Geographic came in when I went in, and they paid to pump out the water. It took about almost a month to pump it out. And then the people from the Antiquities and the U.S. Army and the Ambassador Cardoni went in, and they found the crates still unopened with the lock still on them, and they began to take the objects out. Here you see one of the crowns from the Assyrian queen's tombs. Now, they took it all back. They took the crates back to the museum, and they worked on them for about 3 weeks to restore them. They had people from the British Museum in to help them to restore this stuff. The gold wasn't hurt much, but there was a lot of inlay in a lot of these. A lot of the inlay got lost. Some spectacular pieces like this. And here you see, this is the opening of the museum. They made big, big noise on the 4th of July all over the world. They have opened the Iraq Museum, so you can forget about that story. The story dies. And they unfortunately forgot about inviting any Iraqis until the very day of the opening. They finally had to bring in a few Iraqis to look at their own treasures. And here you see, this is Mr. Bremer. You can see, now doesn't he look bright? You see what went wrong with Iraq? Just take a look at that face. This is Mr. Bremer, who was running the show and wrecking Iraq. Anyway, the day that the war started, the looting started intensively all across southern Iraq, and sites that the Iraqis had gone in to dig to stop the looting were hit again by the looters. This is work done by the Antiquities Department in the late 90s up until 2003. This is a great big palace at one of these sites, and this is a bunch of houses they had dug. All of this is looter, and there are looter holes going down into the building that they have finished. All of this is looting holes. These are looting holes. And this is a scene, I was actually on a helicopter with these guys. This is American troops going in and chasing off looters. Looters are out here and they're leaving the site, and they've left their shovels behind. And you can see it's major damage. I mean, this is going down 15, 20 feet in some cases, and they'll get down here and do a tunnel out from it underneath. So there's tremendous damage being done to these sites. And this is still going on at a reduced rate. It's much less than it was, but it's still going on. And the world, it's out there in the market. It's not coming to the States. It's not going to England, but it's floating around the world. Thousands of objects. Now, in 2003, Donny was made the director of the Iraq Museum, and he did a brilliant job of it. And it was under him that they began to do the reconstruction of the museum itself, bringing in new lighting, bringing in new air conditioning, bringing in various other things, training people, sending his people abroad to the United States, to England, to various places to learn conservation, to learn how to deal with objects. And there was a whole series of these training sessions for these people, and Donny managed it beautifully. He worked very, very closely, this guy on the left, John Russell, who was there representing he was representing the U.S. government for antiquities. You know, he was he's a professor at a college in Boston. And he worked very, very close with Donny doing a lot of this. And the other person who followed him was this woman here, Zainab Bahrani, who's a native Iraqi, who teaches at Columbia. So she went in for about a 3-month period, also working very closely with Donny, trying to stop the sites from being robbed, trying to start up a police force for the sites, and redoing the museum. This was a period of very intense work, not just in getting objects back and recording what they had, and trying to make an inventory of what was there so they could know what was lost. And there were about 15,000 objects lost at least. And there was also a time when Donny was going to lots and lots of conferences. Here he is in Japan, and he was also in Brussels. He was in the U.S. He was he was all over the place. In between being the director of the museum and then later as the president of the State Board of Antiquities. This is the head of the entire antiquities service for a good part of 2005, and then he had to leave because his family was being threatened and he was under tremendous pressure. After that, you then get Donny, the spokesman for Iraqi antiquities, Donny appearing with Bogdanos in various places. And then there I am again. I'd totally forgotten that we had a thing at the National Press Club. I don't even know exactly when that was. But there's Donny and there's Bogdanos, and we don't look as if we're quite believing what we're hearing. But anyway, these are, after 2005, 2006, Donny was able to get a job teaching at Stony Brook in New York, and this is Donny in those years. Donny as in his office or in his lab, Donny traveling, undoubtedly. Here he is with Elizabeth Stone, who got him the position at Stony Brook, and there he is giving a lecture at some point. Donny also received a Beacon Award in New York a few years ago, very well deserved. And here he is, going around giving lectures for the next 3 to 4 or 5 years. And in fact, it was meeting occasionally with old friends, Iraqis. Here he is with Selma Radi, another great Iraqi archaeologist who unfortunately also died in October of last year. And there's with very close friend Sam Paley, who also died last year, and again with Zainab Bahrani in New York. Donny on the circuit. Here he is in Chicago. He was here at least 2 or 3 times giving lectures and standing in front of our bull, and here he is with the Assyrian community. And I think that Peter Bobo will talk more about his involvement with the Assyrian community, his involvement with Assyrians as the followers of the Great Assyrian Empire. This was the last time we had the great pleasure of being in his company. This was at a meeting that I called for archaeology in February in Philadelphia. He showed up with this is one of the Iraqi students now studying in the U.S., and we were talking, and this is Irene Winter, who teaches at Harvard, and we are sitting around the table, and Donny was very, very much a dominant figure in this meeting. And unfortunately, we lost him about 2 weeks later, and once again going out to talk and to make people aware of Iraq and its importance and the importance of its antiquities. And I'm going to leave you with that photograph. This is the way I like to remember Donny. He was a great friend, he was a great human being, and he had a wonderful sense of humor, and you should all be very proud of him, those of you who claim a heritage with him, and we have missed him enormously, and will continue to. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Peter Bobo. I'm the Donny George Wakana's brother-in-law. Today I'll speak on behalf of the family. As everybody knows, the Donny George family, they are still living in Stony Brook in New York. Hopefully they'll move to Chicago in a couple, 2 months. On behalf of Donny George Wakana's family, his wife Najat, his daughter Maryam, and his sons Stephen and Martin, I would like to take this opportunity and thank the Oriental Institute, especially Dr. Gil Stein, Professor McGuire Gibson, and all other colleagues and friends of Dr. Donny George Ukana. For this opportunity to be part of this exhibit dedication in Donny's memory. To those who are not familiar with Donny George Ukana, Donny George Ukana was an Assyrian archaeologist from Iraq. Was born in 1950 in a town called Habaniya, 60 miles west of Baghdad. He completed his primary education in this little town. And in 1959, let me just say something about this town. This town was a base for the Great Britain Army when the Great Britain was conquering Iraq till 1958, if I remember. In 1959, the family moved to Baghdad, and Donny George completed his secondary and primary schools in a city called Al-Dora, southwest suburbs of Baghdad. Like all young men, people get into sports and other hobbies. Believe it or not, Donny George, in his early young age, he was a bodybuilder. Then after a while, he changed his hobby from bodybuilder. He became a drummer in a local band in city Al-Dora. After that, he became a professional drummer in a band called 99%. It called 99% for a reason. One of the reasons is Donny George was the only Assyrian in the band, and the other four, they were Armenian. That's why they called the band 99%. After that, Donny George graduated from high school and went to college. He got his bachelor's degree in archaeology in 1974. Then he got his master's degree of arts in prehistoric archaeology from the University of Baghdad in 1986. And he got his PhD in the same major, prehistoric archaeology, from the University of Baghdad in 1995. Donny became a public figure, especially after the looting and destruction of the Baghdad Museum. He traveled and spoke about the destruction in the museum all over the world. He spoke in Europe, he spoke in Japan, here in the United States. The only place that Donny could not speak was Australia. Unfortunately, he passed before he got to Australia. And the reason I'm saying this is because most of this family lives in Sydney, Australia. After looking at this, you will say Donny was born to tell a story that was not much different from that of the struggle of his own wounded Assyrian people. Donny's love for homeland Iraq drove him to unveil more than 30 years of excavation, lecture, and publishing, telling the story of the oldest recorded history of mankind. His pure love for humanity was accomplished years before his work came to the attention of the media, at which time he successfully, not by himself, but by help for other organizations like Interpol, UNESCO, and SAVE. He returned half of what was looted from the museum. I think so the number that was looted from the museum was 15,000 pieces. Almost half of that was returned because of Donny's tireless effort speaking about it. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity. I didn't have a chance to thank some people that they had support us during the hard time. One of them is Assyrian Church of the East, Assyrian National Council, and Dr. Norman Solka. Each one, he said, in his way, supported the family during the hard time. Lastly, I would like to say that Donny George was a great father, a great husband, a great educator, a great scholar, and a great archaeologist. He will be missed by many of us, most of all by his family and by peers here in the Oriental Institute and University of Chicago, and by friends and colleagues throughout the world. God bless Donny's soul, and God bless you all for being part of this exhibit dedication. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for those beautiful words. And thank you, Mac, for evoking Donny's scholarly contribution so eloquently. I'd like to invite all of you now to join us in our Mesopotamian gallery, where we will just have a very brief dedication of one of the exhibit cases in our Mesopotamian gallery in Donny's memory. And there will be a reception afterwards, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk with the Bobo family and with Professor Gibson and to share our memories of Donny. So thank you, both of you, for speaking so beautifully and powerfully, and thank you for bringing Donny's memory back to life for all of us. And please join us next door in the Mesopotamian Gallery. Thank you. My colleagues and I had a series of long talks where we were trying to think of what was the best way to commemorate Donny George and his very great contributions to Mesopotamian archaeology. He, as you've heard tonight, he contributed so much to the actual rediscovery of the civilizations of Mesopotamia, the real origins of our own urban civilization. Donny contributed not just to the recovery of that civilization, but to the preservation of that civilization and to raising the awareness of the world of the importance of these treasures that are our shared heritage for all of us, wherever we may be, whatever language we may speak. And that contribution was so great and so important and is really something that is of lasting value. And we thought long and hard about what's the best way to commemorate him. And what we eventually came up with was that we thought there was nothing more fitting than to have one of the cases in our gallery dedicated to Donny's memory. And then we tried to decide, well, which should it be? Should it be something distinctively Assyrian? And we said, no, his contribution was so much more than that. And we thought, oh, should it be kings? No, it shouldn't be kings. And finally, what we settled on was this case here. And I want to just say one or two words about it, because our museum is different from most other museums. Most museums will show you the most beautiful art objects, the true masterpieces of an ancient civilization. And our museum certainly has them. You just have to look down the hall, down the gallery, and you'll see one of our greatest treasures, one of the greatest artistic masterpieces of Assyrian civilization. But much more than that, what we try to do is we try to show the full range of life in an ancient civilization. And this case is devoted to everyday life. And I hope you'll all get a chance to look, and you'll see the children's toys from ancient Mesopotamia. You'll see that this whole case is devoted to the household and family. And somehow it seemed like there was no more appropriate way to evoke Donny's contributions to rediscovering Mesopotamian civilization and to Donny's character as a person. You've heard from Peter Bobo about what a wonderful husband and father and family member he was. Then to have a case devoted to household and family in ancient Mesopotamia, to the everyday life in ancient Mesopotamia as a way of evoking his memory. Because when we see these simple toys, these simple household objects, we can feel the deepest connection with our past. And that's what Donny brought to us, is Donny helped us all reconnect with the past, with our shared heritage of Mesopotamian civilization. So it's my really great honor on behalf of my colleagues, of Donny's colleagues everywhere in the world of archaeology, and on behalf of all of you, to dedicate this case. And I'll read you the plaque. It says, "In memory of Dr. Donny George Yohanna for his contributions to the understanding of Mesopotamian civilization." So I want to invite you all to take a look at the case, enjoy the galleries, have some refreshments, and please talk with each other and talk with the family, and let's celebrate the life of someone whom we all remember with the greatest affection and respect. Thank you very much.
أتيت من الجبال بصخور ضخمة، وأمرت النحاتين البارعين بأن يصنعوا لي تماثيل وعول جبلية لتكون أرواحا حارسة. وضعت كل منها عند مدخل بوابة لينظر كل منها إلى إحدى جهات الريح الأربع.
حكم الملك سرجون الثاني أعظم ملوك آشور لمدة 15 سنة، من عام 721 لغاية 705 قبل الميلاد. كان سيداً لكل الشرق الأدنى، وامتدت مملكته من الخليج إلى البحر المتوسط. الكلمات التي نقشت على جوانب التماثيل الأربعة تخلد عملاً عظيماً نفذه أثناء حكمه المجيد. بنى عاصمة جديدة له أسماها دور شاروكين أو حصن سرجون. كانت التقاليد القديمة تدعي إلى وضع تمثال على كل مدخل من مداخل المدينة بعد الانتهاء من بنائها، لذا زودت البوابات بتماثيل ضخمة لها صورة مخلوقات مركبة. الثور المجنح برأس إنسان اسمه لامسو بالآشورية، ونادرا ما وضعت تماثيل الأسود. صخورا هائلة يتراوح ارتفاعها من 3 إلى 6 أمتار، نقشت منها بالنحت البارز الملامح التشريحية الدقيقة والمبهرة لهذه الكائنات الخرافية. تاج مؤلف من قرون متوازية تذكر بالهالة الإلهية. رأس إنسان بلحية مجعدة الشعر، الجناح، وجسد جبار قد يكون جسد ثور أو أسد. وإن كانت هذه المخلوقات المركبة تتألف من أجزاء متباينة، إلا إنها جمعت كل ما يحويه الكون من مخيف ومرعب: قوة الثور وشراسة الأسد، جناح النسر الذي يهيمن على العالم من أعالي السماء، وأخيرا حكمة الإنسان ورجاحة عقله. كان مظهر التماثيل يزرع الرعب